Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 2, Volume 3. All right. Page 1322. So we're discussing here the second method, how Chesed sweetens Gvura, but in this case, it's called transforming the Gvura. Not just sweetening it, not just overriding it, outnumbering it, but overpowering it to the extent that it actually transforms its very personality due to the fact that it's coming from a higher level than the whole structure, than the whole system. Like he gave said, when you see the king's glowing face with chesed and teiv, the words ba'ir pnei melech chayim, ha'oris pnei hamelech, b'rav tuv chesed, when it's got ir pnei melech b'rav chesed, ha'atzmi mamish. These are all terms he used. When that's revealed, and that's like, for example, Rosh Hashanah, through Shofar of the Jews, when we blow Shofar, so that automatically, b'meila, he said, not through mixing into the Gvura, not through persuading it, convincing it, conquering it, or in the case like in a prosecutor in defense, not by making arguments that persuade, and the evidence is so strong and the case is made, so the defense wins, Chesed wins. But here, like he said, is galus niglos eira elyam memela nepachadin lechesed v'rachim. So, in the process of transforming Gvura, in the process of sweetening Gvura, I'm talking Gvuras, this is the second type of sweetening. Again, coming through Chesed, but it's not just weakening it or even nullifying it, but it's transforming it. But it's clearly a power from outside of it, a higher power that causes this transformation. Yesterday, there were questions about this. It could be that when we first learned the topic, remember, the Rebbe Rashab went in an orderly way. First, he spoke about the transformation on the bottom of page 1317, where he first introduced the second way of transforming. So on top of, if you go to the order here, on top of 1316, he said there's two ways I'm talking Gvuras. The second way he introduced at the bottom of page 1317. So initially, when you read it, it sounded like that the bitter itself becomes sweet. And then, but he qualified immediately on page 1318 that too comes from Chesed. So it could be maybe some of you may have gotten the impression that this second level is that the Gvura itself is transformed as it from within itself, but that's not the case. It's the Chesed that's doing it, and the Cheseds come from a higher place. We're going to learn later, as I said, 1325 and on, how it happens from Gvura itself, not through Chesed. And that is indeed a transformation from within itself. Here, it's clearly coming from a higher power. And then he said at the bottom of page 1321 that the same is v'chein b'teira, v'cheinu b'teira. Since Teira is Eitz HaChaim, tree of life, life meaning be'etzem, life and goodness, chesed, so it has the power, which is what we're in the middle of discussing now. That the luminary within Torah, meaning its root, as he explains afterwards, that the moyer is primis HaTorah, the level of primis HaChochma, or the way he called it before that, Chochma, the actual level was Chochma Gduma, ub'chinas primis HaChochma. With primis HaChochma, primis Abba, primis Atik. So it connects to this, so that's the root of Torah, that's where it originates, the moyer Shabbat, and that has the power to enter. When a person learns Torah, all levels of Torah, as he said, not just Primis HaTorah, because Moyer Shabbat means not that only when you learn the Moyer. It says the Moyer in the Torah you're learning, so like he made clearly that's mashma from that even in the Oira Torah, even in the light of Torah, that's not the Moyer, not the luminary, even in Chetzenius HaTorah, even in Nigla the Torah, you also have the level of Nistar and Primis HaTorah, and the Primis Mamish. Not just that it's hidden there, but the Primis Mamish is in there, and that's why when a person learns, he said, Yesh Shlemer, the learning Torah, as long as he knows and believes that this is the chokhmah, the wisdom and the will of God, the luminary within the Torah, in other words, in all levels of Torah, there's embedded this essential component, which causes them to return to good, even if he was a Rasha Gomer, as he said at the top of the page. And that's Chesed V'emes Yechuper Avon, and Torah is Emes, that even though a carbon cannot forgive, but through Torah and Gemilas Chasadim. Why? Because Torah is the Moyer Sheba, that causes a person to be forgiven, and he's describing it here to transform even the negative to positive. It's coming from another power. It's not coming from the Gvura. It's coming from a Chesed Elyon, a higher Chesed, or in this case, the deepest level that comes from the Primis Chachma, and from Chachma Geduma, all the way from Primis Atik, which is the Moyer of Torah. That's where we stopped. Now, he's going to one more, still finishing, wants to explain why does it say Machzirei Lemutov? Why doesn't it say L'Teiv? Returns to good. What's Lemutov? So he's going to explain like this. I'm going to continue reading. It's a little below the half of the page, page 1322. The line begins, Mokir L'chol Minei Teiv. I'm sorry, Hamoyer Shaba. Ve'emer Machzirei Lemutov. V'lo yomar L'Teiv. He returns Lemutov, which also means to goodness. Why not? He doesn't say L'Teiv, to good. Why? Because it's not just to goodness, it's to the source of goodness. Hainu shenasa teiv be'etzem. That the Torah caused them to be teiv be'etzem fundamentally, like we said before, that it was fundamentally bitter and it became fundamentally sweet. Not just its personality, not just its outer, not so superficially or temporarily. It became teiv be'etzem. That's what Torah's power is, l'mutov. Shehu mokir l'chol minei teiv. That's the source of all matters of teiv. I've explained a number of times that you say, for example, a person is a good person versus a person who does good things. A person who does good things, when he's doing something good, he's doing something good. But when he's asleep, or when he's not doing something good, not necessarily. Maybe when it's inconvenient, he won't be so good. A person who's fundamentally good is good 24/7. It's like the Friedrich Rebbe says about a soldier. A soldier isn't a soldier only when he's on the front lines fighting. Even when he's asleep, he's a soldier. His whole life is being a soldier of God. So there could be good, and there could be the root of good, the good be'etzem. So he's saying mutav is referring to mutav is not just that he became good, that he did something bad, and now he's returned to good, but he's reaching a place of teiv be'etzem mokir l'chol minei teiv v'zeh mutav loshen mafil. So when you say teiv, it means good. Mutav means it makes things good. Mafil is like not just the pu'ula, the action, but mafil that causes things to be that way. So it's like the root is the cause of goodness. So that's the diuk l'mutav. So you see the power here that Torah has to that extent of transformation. The kol zeh, now he's summing it up. Hu sha'alidei elyon b'yetzer. Here it makes it very clear again. All this is that through our elyon b'yetzer. This is not coming from working with gvura. If you remember, we learned at the bottom of page 1320, he said, Arich Hampin, like Avas Elam, can convince an animal soul that is good for the animal soul to love God. But it can't change the animal soul. He said clearly, you can convince because it's speaking on its terms. It's like when you're in the system, you could change this, you can impact the system, but you can't change it. So the nefesh habamis does not get changed, like he says clearly. But something that comes from elyon yetzer, hamuvdel be'erech, that's relatively removed. It's not from the same system. It's coming from outside the system, from above it. Like he said before, atik, higher than atik. Had is the esa hamtoka that causes and creates a sweetening. Sharan nimtek memela, Memela, meaning automatically. It's like a higher power of oir that just automatically changes the reality of the lower item, in this case, gvura. V'nasa b'chinas teiv ba'etzem. And it becomes fundamentally good. Now, of course, if you think about it, is this true transformation, or is it due to a power above it? It's like similar when we speak about Matan Torah and Purim, that it says, Kimu v'kibla Yehudim. Though Matan Torah was a fundamental event that changed the Eden, but they still had a taina, because they said, Kof aleim har kigigis, God, you compelled us to say Nasa v'nishma, because you told us, put a mountain above us. Chassidus explains that's Ahava Rabba, a very high power of love. The love overwhelmed us. And that's why by Purim, it says, Kimu v'kiblu, they accepted it willingly from the bottom up. So there's something lacking, obviously, even though the transformation is a very powerful one, but ultimately it's happening due to a higher power. We're going to learn about this later, but this is the key here. So it's Ayin Beis. But it causes it not just to, you don't just convince it and persuade it. Where there, it's more internal, but it doesn't have this power. It's like what it says in Chassidus very often, that asusa de latata, when it comes from your own initiative, it's more you. It's more internalized. You own it. But it's not as high in its pure firepower. When it comes asusa de leila, the firepower is far greater, but it's not as internalized. Now, obviously, you want both, especially in the interface. That Ayin Beis is so the central theme of Ayin Beis. So this is a common discussion. It's come from above. Then it's like what the Rebbe said about Mashiach. I did everything I can. Do what you can. Can we do what the Rebbe could do? Obviously not. But there's something that Adam reitze b'kav shalei yesem etisha kam shel chaver. A person has more desire and more pleasure in one measure that they initiated on their own than 9 measures they get as a gift. Now, $9 million is a lot more than 1 million. But if the 1 million came through your effort and the 9 million you get were given as a gift, though you can buy more with it, but it's not, you're going to blow it quicker as well because you didn't earn it. So Chassidus talks always about these two. He's not discussing that right now. Just wanted to point this out. But on the other hand, this higher power does have the power of transformation, and the lower power has the power of change, of persuasion, of convincing, like we spoke earlier, outnumbering, like the sweeter waters, sweetening. If there's enough sweet, it will neutralize the bitter waters. The Rebbe, just to give another example for this, in the famous Sheftim Tafshin Nun Aleph Sicha, the Rebbe spoke about prophecy, a prophet. So he spoke, there's a pasuk that says in the Haftarah, Vashiva Shavtayach Kivarishena V'Yitzayach Kivatchila. That Mashiach comes, the Sheftim will return, the judges that were here at the time in the Beis HaMikdash, V'Yitzayach, and the advisors will also. What's the difference between a judge and an advisor? Like Sheftim v'Shetrim, there it's judges and police. But so the Rebbe brought the example from the Mishnah. It says, "Aseh lecha rav, v'kanei lecha chaver." You should appoint a rav, an authority, and you should appoint a rav and acquire a chaver, a friend. What's the difference? An authority has the power to give you a psak, a ruling. You say to him, I want to know what to do. Tell me, is this, I should do this or do that? A chaver is a yayitz. He's an advisor. He's not going to tell you what to do. He's more on your level. He could discuss it with you. So the mile of a yayitz, it's more internal. You could discuss it as someone that is not muvdal be'erech. It's not someone completely outside of you. A rav is someone who's not your equal. He's your authority. So you go to him for a ruling. So the quality of that is it's absolute, but it's not as internalized. It's not so personal. Whereas an advisor doesn't have that authority. It's not coming from a higher place because it's someone that's more or less your equal. Or even if they know more than you, but they're still speaking to you more like, let's discuss the pros, the cons. It's like consultation. So it has the mile of internalization, just as another example. But Bottom line is, we are talking now the higher level of Gilead Ayin Beis, and that causes the transformation. That has the power to transform. And what is this in Avodah? So if you remember, we learned earlier, there's the Tzaddik Gomor, the Tzaddik She'eina Gomor, and the Beinani. The Beinani, the battle between Chesed and Gvura is ongoing. Even though he controls the city, technically, thought, speech, and action, he controls the Iktana Zaguf, his small city, his body, his being. But it's not a real control. It's a control only in actions and thought and speech. The Tzaddik She'eina Gomor has eliminated the animal soul, but he's not transformed it. And the Tzaddik Gomor has completely transformed it. And as we learned a few pages back, first on page 1321, but even more importantly, relevant to us, on page 1317, he said, even the Tzaddik Gomor, he said, which is Ahava B'Taanugim, so even when something negative comes, but it's b'meila, he says, those are the words. The halaw is not through a battle. It's because his deep love for God with pleasures and desires is so powerful, it automatically, so-called, dissolves and transforms the enemy. That's what he says. This is close to the bottom of the paragraph on page 1317. So he's going to go back to that now and says, and so too, this higher level of sweetening that transforms is like the Aveda of Tzaddikim. The higher level of Tzaddikim, complete, full and entire Tzaddikim. Ahava B'Taanugim. Not Ahava Rabba, but Ahava B'Taanugim, a love with desires, the deepest possible love, with pleasure, completely consumed with love for godliness. Like we learned earlier, the higher level of Yichud Pnimi, of Abba V'Ima, where Chacham and Bina are gazing at the Metzach, at the forehead of Arich and Atik, that completely consumes the person, is completely elevated in godliness. As we learned earlier, that's coming from the inner and core of the soul mamish, literally, which is the level of Yechidah Shabanefesh. He b'chinas ava pnimis. This is a very profound internal ava. Shemeir v'nirgish b'pnimis hakeiches. That radiates and is felt and sensed. B'pnimis hakeiches, in the innermost part of all the faculties. Harizeh mahapeches ativius legamri. This has the power to completely transform the nature, the very nature of the person or the animal soul, completely transformed. As we learned earlier, that transformation has to come. If you maybe remember back, you learned Bina doesn't have the power to transform because Bina relates to the Midas. You need Chachmah, and even more than Chachmah, you need Chachmah as it relates to Arich and Atik. That has the power to transform. You cannot transform something when you relate to it. It has to be from a higher level. So now he's connecting it all. That's the Tzaddik Gomor. And he says he transforms it. Not just that he's not bound by his natural instincts. Yetzer means he leaves it behind. It's like a person, let's say, has certain habits. And in this case, he goes beyond, he goes out of his comfort zone. He's saying more than that. He actually transforms his natural being. This is from chapter 9 in Tanya, chapter 9 and 10. That the Yesod HaMayim HaRoim the Nefesh HaBamis, we know that the animal soul, Taivus, its desires come from the Yesod HaMayim, from the element of water, like he says in the end of chapter 1 in Tanya. So by this person, by the Tzaddik Gomor, Nepach L'Teiv Gomor, his Ahava B'Taanugim has caused it to spill over, as he says in Tanya there, and actually transform, by its sheer power, transform that animal soul to the Teiv Gomor, Yetzer Hora Nasa Kama Yetzer Teiv Mamish. And what was originally the Yetzer Hora, it becomes completely like the Yetzer Teiv Mamish. Not just it's empty. It's not just libi chol bekirbi, that he's iskafia, that he's eliminated, that he's neutralized it, or he's completely subdued it, as if it's asleep, or even if as it's dead. It's not empty. He's actually transformed it to the Yetzer Tev Mamish. This says explicitly the second half of chapter 9 in Tanya. And this is brought in chapter 10 in Tanya. Man manchen dai di chashecha mahapchen lenehera v'ta'amin merira lemiska. That's what where Rabbi says, where Rabbi says that only one can enter here. From the Zohar, the Akdamat to Zohar, we read it a few days ago, a few previous classes. Only one that could enter is someone who has transformed darkness to light and bitterness to sweet. So the Alter Rebbe teaches clearly it's not a small level. It's not the first level of sweetening, because then not everybody, but even Tzaddik Sheina Gomer would be able to enter. Oh, he's making a condition. It's not a Tzaddik Sheina. It's only a Tzaddik Sheina. That he transformed the negative and elevated it to Kedusha. That the darkness has become literally like oir. Like he writes there in Tanya in chapter 10. So this is now the second higher level of sweetening the Gvura, but this case now we're talking about sweetening, transforming it, not just neutralizing it, not just nullifying it. Okay, I'll take some questions. And this is going to continue this discussion until 1325, where he's going to go now to the third Eifen of Hamtakas HaGvuras, from the Gvuras within themselves. Now, in the next paragraph, he's going to make it clear that all this is coming from Chesed, not from Gvura. But let me, since we ended the paragraph, let me stop. Let me hear any questions anybody may have.
Well, when David Melech said that he killed his Yetzer Hora, so according to this, it would seem like he didn't reach that ultimate level of transformation of it, rather than just eliminating it.
That's what it says. The Rebbe has, but it says by Avram Avinu, Levove with two bases is even a higher level. That's correct.
Wow, that's amazing. Where does the Rabbi refer to that?
Same as with Rabbi that said Anok Benini.
Right.
Even though he was a completely dedicated to the mitzvahs, because, like he explains later in Tanya.
Where does that say? Where does the Rebbe talk about that level? About David Melech? No, not just.
I remember I remember at least 10, 15 times, different notes. Really? I don't remember one place necessarily. Maybe at the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, where he brings that expression, and maybe the Rebbe explains it there. But I remember in different sikhs, footnotes. I don't remember now exactly. You'll have to look it up through the index. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm. I keep
remember,
thinking
there's a lot of levels in a tzaddik sheina gomer and a tzaddik gomer. And David himself, you could imagine, also went through stages in his life. So I don't know if that was his ultimate level. That when he said that, that's the level he was talking about.
You know, I keep thinking that, when it says in the Gula, time of the Gula, the wolf will lie with the lamb, and that there will be there will be no nefesh Yetzer Hara will be eliminated. Are we talking about this kind of what we're talking about? A transformation of the inherent what we consider the nature will transform that natural animal enemies, so to speak, will become best of buddies, so to speak. So
I would reserve that till we finish this whole subject, because it's premature to come to any such conclusions right now, because he hasn't yet really established which, we know that there's going to be another level of transformation, And he also said that higher level is l'ased love in the future. These levels we're talking about, even though we have a taste of it, he said on page 13, 18, and also earlier, but I would reserve any such conclusions till he finishes the whole subject. There's much more to come on this. And when we talk the transformation of darkness to light. And just for the record, the Rambam says Garzev and Kevis is a moshel for the nations. The Rebbe has a sikh in Chelik Zayin, B'chukesai, this week's parsha actually, where he talks about Vishbesi Chayirah in Ha'aretz, that all the wild animals will be Hishbesi, which means will be silenced, will be rest. So he explains there's two opinions in Medrash, whether Hishbesi means they'll be eliminated or they'll be transformed. So it's a discussion. You can look at the Sikhas, volume 7 on B'chukaisai. There's a whole Sikha in it. What does Hishbesi mean? Does Hishbesi mean eliminated or does it mean transformed? There's two opinions in Medrash. That one will be that they'll Mavir and Chayis, they'll be removed from this world, the predators and the wild animals. And the other is that they will be changed, that they will actually, like rest on Shabbos, they will no longer be predatory, even though they'll exist. So he talks about that as well. So there's two different ways of understanding it, which ultimately could be connected to all of this, but I would wait till we hear all the levels, then we can see which one fits where.
And finally, when we ended the class, you had mentioned you might want to speak about how come when we look at the Ma'or Ba in Torah, we don't necessarily, or many of us don't experience this transformation. Is this a good time to talk about it or another time?
No, I could talk about it now. It's fine. But let me first see if there are any other questions on what we just learned, and then I'll say something about that. Are there anybody else wants to ask anything? Okay, I will discuss it, even though it's not literally pshat. The question is not on Ayin Beis. The question is b'chlal in general. A statement the Torah says that machzir l'mutav. And I also yesterday briefly alluded to that there's sometimes it says that when a person learns Torah shalei l'shma, or for selfish reasons, they can turn Sam Chaim to Sam Movis. They can turn the Torah, which is Torah's Chaim, a living Torah, to a Torah of death, God forbid. So how is it consistent with this? So really, this is a much broader question in general. The broader question in general is, we learned this week's Parsha, Im b'chukeisei telechu, when you'll follow my laws, I will give you the rain in its time, and Gishmechem also means Gashmias. All the blessings of Torah. How many times we say in Torah? Every day in Shema we say that when you'll do Hadvarim El, when you'll do these mitzvahs, v'nasati yivula, I will bless you. So the big klotz kasha is, so why, when we do mitzvahs, don't we always see blessings? And on the contrary, we've seen so many terrible things happen, even to people who do mitzvahs. So overall, people answer the question very flippantly. What do they say? Because we also do Averis. And the same Eibishter that said that when you transgress, you'll be punished. You'll be cursed, God forbid. From due to our sins, we were displaced. We were exiled. So the question, of course, then is, what happens if you do both? Every human being has mitzvahs and also has Averis. So we should be rewarded for our mitzvahs. So what happens is it cancels it out. We learned before that Avera is cancel out, does extinguish a mitzvah, but not Torah. It said clearly. So a lot of questions, which always go back to the big question. Why does God allow good people to suffer? So I think a few things have to be said about this. First of all, it's much more complicated than just a black and white thing. It's not like magic buttons. You press a button, you do a mitzvah Torah, and everything is resolved and your life is perfect. We do live in a world, Elam Haza Gashmi, and after the Chet Tzadas, the world fundamentally changed, and all the unfortunate transgressions conceal the divine in this world. In addition to the tzimtzum that God himself did. So as a result, not everything is revealed to us. So we could do much good, and you don't necessarily always see the results. So when the Gemara says, Machzir lemutav, you could say, fundamentally, that's what it's going to do. But it may do it in time. It may do it in generations from now. It may do it overall. Doesn't necessarily mean immediately. That's a very balbatish general answer. But more specifically, you have to remember that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Geras HaTshuva, he asks, why is it in the time of Shas, when a person turns 60, if, God forbid, they were over an Avera that was Chayiv Karas, Avera that says that you'll be cut off. So Karas is Misi B'dei Shemayim. It's not that he's put to death on earth. Is that God, after 60 years old, he won't live more than 60, which is why the Gemara talks about when a person turns 60, they should make a suda, a party, a celebration that they are living. So the Alter Rebbe says something very powerful there. He says, so why do we see people that are Chayiv Karas and they live much longer than 60? And his answer is, because in Zman HaBayis, the world was not as crass or coarse. So whatever was in Ruchnius came down Begashmias. So if a person, basically their lifeline ended at 60 because of their disconnection, because it's cause and effect. Person did something that they cut themselves off from the source of life. So the Eibishter says at 60, their life can't continue in this world. That's when we're aligned with heaven. But when a world is not aligned, ironically, even that aspect is also so essentially the wires are there's a turbulence, and that's why people live longer, because of the Golus, because of the darkness of the Golus. You see that? You'd think it would be the other way around. So in other words, our existence below has somewhat, I don't want to say become independent, but is not completely aligned. And that's why we can live on. That's why a person can be wicked. And because we're not so aligned with Ruchnius, not everything happens exactly as which should have happened. My point that I want to make is that the Torah's power is never compromised, but there could be a hell and a hester in the way that's channeled to us. It's just like, I don't want to use this example because it's personally relevant to me recently, but you could have a very healthy heart, but if the fuel lines are blocked, the arteries are blocked, it could be big problems. So we could have the Torah's power to cause someone to be transformed is there, but then there are fuel lines. We have to also be a keli to it. It's like saying the bracha is there, but you need to be able to channel it. So I would explain on the overall picture that these Maimar Chazal are all true, and they will have that impact, but it doesn't always happen automatically. It could. It's possible it should happen. You see, the Rabbeim said that someone who eats kasha and temchet mimim is going to do tshuva. That the kasha and temchet mimim, it becomes this running, like almost joke. Anyone who ate kasha and yeshiva temchet mimim is ultimately going to be all right. And then, of course, I could tell you at least 20, 30 people who ate kasha and temchet mimim who asked me, they said, well, I'm not all right. Many left, at least on a surface level. So how do you explain all this? The answer is, you did something beautiful in your life, something kedusha le'zazim kema. I deal with them often with parents who unfortunately sometimes have challenges with their children who not necessarily are following the path the parents would like. Some go very far off. And one of the things that I remember seeing from the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe in the Sichos, he said, parents, once you planted the seeds, you did everything you could do. Obviously, nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes, including parents. We know that. But still, the good deeds you did, the efforts that a mother and a father make in investing in their children, even if it's not always perfect, but the attempts and their intentions are good ones, we know the chazakihi shetamule nechazeres reikam is an expression. The Rebbe brings it very often in Igris. It's a chazak, it's a rule, it's a law. That effort is never going to go to waste. The fact that we don't always see the fruit of our labor doesn't change the fact, doesn't change that reality. First of all, for all you know, you made it easier. Maybe you've opened up doors that you're not aware of. Secondly, it may happen a little later, a little earlier, maybe in ways we don't always see. Sometimes we're zeicher, just like it comes down to anything. You know, dvarim hayetzim el halev nechnasim el halev, words from the heart enter the heart. You don't always see it immediately. I mean, how many, I can tell you stories after story that I may have had an impact on somebody 30 years ago. I never saw it. Today I hear they're in a situation and they'll say, you know, it was all based on something they heard from me. Not that I'm looking for the credit. My point is that you don't see these things always, especially in Golis, because there's all the turbulence, there's all the blocks, the wires are blocked. But it's the basic result, what he says in Tanya, that mitzvah zu, you do a mitzvah, is yichud zen nitzchihu la'elam lamayla la'elam vod. You do a mitzvah, and the world changes forever. You may not see it in this world. It's like Chassidus gives the example. It's like munach b'kufsa. You've added treasure into a chest. The chest is closed, but it's there. Chassidus brings that the oiris accumulating in Atzilus. You know, good example would be when a volcano erupts. It doesn't happen overnight. It's years and years of pressures under the ground that ultimately cause an eruption or an earthquake. The same thing with Yiddishkeit. It can take thousands of years, and look at it, that the world has slowly been changed, and then there comes a moment when it erupts, the Gula. It's not a Chiddush. It's as a result of years and years, a process that's been accumulated. I'm talking now in the macrocosm. On a microcosm, and on a personal level, the same thing is true. And that's ultimately how you have to explain these. It's not as such a black and white thing. You say, okay, he learned Torah, and therefore he doesn't have it, he's going to return to good. Yeah, it may be the same day, it may be 5 years later, maybe it doesn't say exactly when. And I think other factors come into play. The fact is, even blessings that we are promised and are there, sometimes the channel is blocked. Sometimes we are not making the right keli. So ultimately, you need to find some explanation like that. That it doesn't take away. The bottom line is Torah has power. It's Hashem's Torah. Let's just think of it the other way around. Since we're coming to Matan Torah, imagine we did not have Torah. God gave us, created us, gave us life, but He didn't give us a Torah. So besides the fact that we not have absolute direction of what God wants us to do in this world, we'd have to figure it out on our own. So we could come up with some rational morality. Human beings have done that. It would be very limited and would be quite subjective and arbitrary, because some people would accept and some not. The Torah tells us what God wants. But there's more than that. As I said yesterday, I know nafshi ksovis yavis. God's saying, I'm instilling myself in Torah. When you learn Torah, you're taking me, you have me. It's a relationship with me, not just with my wisdom, because I'm one with it. So what he's saying essentially, the Chazal, is that when you learn Torah, you have now an additional, in your arsenal, something has been empowered you to not let you remain in dark place the rest of your life. It will return, it will bring you to good. But here he's going even further. It will transform good to bad, bad to good, because it's coming from the highest levels. And the highest levels have the power of transformation. You see expressions like this all the time. Lo yidach memenu nidach, it says. Means there's no person that's lost forever. Everyone's going to ultimately return. Seif Yisrael, Eisen Tshuva, Miyadei Negom. They will do tshuva, the Rambam paskins. How do you know they'll do tshuva? Maybe they won't, because there's the goodness within a person that's fundamentally there. It's one of the Yesodis of Chassidus, one of the Yesodis of the Rebbe, that unfortunately not all Torah people understand fully. They focus on that the sins are stronger. But the concept that you're fundamentally good, where does that come from? Why is it? How do we know that? Because you have a neshama. Selam Elikim. It's not because we think we're great. God said, I gave you a chelik elikam emal mamish. I gave you 9 months of the best schooling possible. You studied the entire Torah in your mother's womb. Frankly, all education after that is downhill, which is, I always felt that's why our schools will never live up to that 9 months. And the Alter Rebbe explains what happens, but then the Malach makes us forget. So the Alter Rebbe says, why we taught the whole Torah, then made to forget? He says, no, Consciously, we're made to forget. But subconsciously, it's in there. It will resonate that when a person will learn Torah properly, it'll be like a truth that they always knew, like hearing a song. You always knew that song, but you couldn't place it. So within our psyche is embedded the neshama. A few pages back, he said, Mashbiyan say. Like we say in the beginning of Tanya, the neshama is given an oath, but Mashbiyan also comes from the word Mazbiya, v'savota. It's fed, it's sated. It's saturated with strengths and knowledge. Kol Torah kula, that's what it says. We learned the whole Torah in our mother's womb. So we're not coming unprepared. So then when you learn Torah, what's doing is it's triggering and reigniting those forces within our subconscious that ultimately can transform us entirely. And remember, Ra at the end of the day is never as powerful as good, but we need to transform it. So the truth is, there's a lot more to the topic than he says here. You have to also remember that we also begin with having goodness within us. It's not like Chesed and Gvura, they're pitted against each other. So good and evil are fighting each other, and now may the best man win. No, good has a lot of advantages, but darkness is still powerful. Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abamis, which is the story of Tanya. That's why he's bringing the Tzaddik Gomer and the Tzaddik Sheina Gomer and the Beinani. So ultimately, Torah gives us that power. Now, you could ask a better question. He says at the end, it's a Tzaddik Gomer that the bad is transformed to good. The Gemara says, not just a Tzaddik Gomer, everybody. You could say it's a direct contradiction. The answer is because everybody has that element. Whether we could have full-blown transformation of the Yetzer Tov to the Yetzer Hora to the Yetzer Tov like a Tzaddik, that obviously is unique and rare. But that we could have some extent of it, some taste of it, some semblance of it, is essentially what he's saying here. So this is some points I would throw into the whole equation here.
Shkoyach, thank you so much. That was enlightening.
Enlightening, good word. Okay, you know what? We'll stop here because we ended the paragraph, and we'll continue. We'll continue on Sunday. But any comments, questions? Anybody wants to weigh in? I'll just conclude with a few stories. Naftali, you're here? Naftali's in the class, right? I heard his voice before. Anyway, I heard this from his father.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Your father was bringing once upstairs in 770. It was maybe one of your children's weddings. I'm not sure.
No, my son's bar mitzvah, and we were sitting upstairs in 770 for many, many hours.
Yes, I was there.
Yes, you and Ari Gaskin.
Yeah, it was a Geschmacke Verbringen. So I'll just share 2-3 stories he told, which I liked. He told the story that when you remember, what was his name? Oh, his daughter was arrested now with this whole scandal, sex scandal from England. He jumped off a yacht. He disappeared. A rich man in England. What was his name? A Jewish guy. You guys remember it was the whole scandal.
He gave a lot of tzedakah.
Robert Maxwell. So Robert Maxwell was Jewish. So when he was, finally they found all kinds of fraud and I don't know, all kinds of stuff going on. So you can imagine the anti-Semites had a heyday. This Jewish criminal, so to speak. Then he disappeared off a yacht, and that was it. No one ever found him. So Rabbi Nachman Sudak, all of Shliach in England, told the Rebbe that in Israeli newspapers they're writing that Rav Yisrael gam v'hem. The Gemara says that the Rav Yisrael, most of the Jews are thieves. So the Gemara is actually talking about Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael most of the people are Jews, so therefore most of the thieves are Jews. But it could also be used in the way of saying Reiv Gamva, that most Yisrael. No, one second, what is it? Reiv Gamva. Reiv Gamva Yisrael, not Reiv Yisrael Gamva. Reiv Gamva Yisrael, and then Eretz Yisrael, the majority of the thieves are Jewish because the majority of people are Jewish. So the Rebbe teached and said, read it this way, that even if Reiv of the person is Gamva, even though most of him is like a thief, he's still Yisrael. He's still a Yisrael, like Afal Pishachota Yisrael. So there's the expression in the Gemara, Chigiga, Fila Peshi Yisrael, Malay Mitzvahs Kerimin, that even sinners among Israel are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So they used to always say that the Satmarov teaches it, that even if he's filled with mitzvahs, he's still Peshi Yisrael, he's still a sinner. And the Rebbe teaches, the Lubavitcher Rebbe teaches that even if he's a sinner, he's filled with mitzvahs. So then Rabbi Greenwald, Naphtali's father, Rabbi Tzvi, told the following story, that there was in the Knesset, when Israel became a state, there was a guy, the communist, he represented the Communist Party, which then was Stalin. There were, so he was like an anti-Semite Jew. His name was Meir Vilner. That was his name. He was hated in Israel because he represented literally communism. And he was always anti-Israel because Stalin had voted in 1948 for Israel, but then when Israel didn't play ball, he came out against them. Anyway, one day, somebody went and took a long knife and stabbed Meir Vilner in his chest. Now, he survived. There was a journalist wrote an article that the person who stabbed him made two mistakes. He should have put the knife in deeper, and he should have twisted it. The Rebbe saw this article, and this journalist came for Tishrei to the Rebbe, to 770. And he went by the Rebbe, I think by Lekach, Erev Yom Kippur. So either the Rebbe knew who he was or he was introduced. And the Rebbe said to him, Nishta zeh shreit min ha'fa'id. It's not how you write about a Jew. That, in other words, even though he was a Jew that made plenty of trouble, but you don't write like that about a Jew. That's what he told. And then the Rebbe said to him, was is Zaid, and what is a Jew? We'll talk about that on Sukkot. So this journalist thought that the Rebbe wants to see him. So he went to Rabbi Charakov, the Rebbe's chief of staff, and said that the Rebbe said he's going to continue this conversation on Sukkot. That maybe make an appointment so he can go into the Yechidus and speak to the Rebbe. So he told him the Rebbe doesn't do Yechidus on Sukkot, on Yontif. After the holidays, after Simchas Torah, by all means, with pleasure, schedule an appointment. He says after Sukkot, he has to leave right away. And the Rebbe said during Sukkot, he didn't say after Sukkot. Rabbi Chadikov said, not sure what the Rebbe doesn't have appointments. So he said, I'll double check. Rabbi Chadikov said, I'll double check. And the Rebbe agreed that he's not doing any appointments Sukkot. So Rabbi Chadikov said, I don't know what the Rebbe meant. Maybe he meant he'll speak about it. Didn't say he's going to talk to you privately. Since you'll be here Sukkot, this Fabrengen. So indeed, that's exactly what happened. Sukkot, there was a Fabrengen. In those years, this is, Rabbi Tzvi said it was Tavshin Chavov, I think, if I recall, 1965, or maybe 66, something like that. Anyway, Sukkot was a Fabrengen in the Sukkah. In those years, there was a Fabrengen. The Sukkah was built next to 770 in the yard there. There's a Chotzer. And he comes into the Fabrengen late. He didn't come in the beginning. As he walks into the sukkah wasn't large. I mean, it was relatively, but you could see everybody. The Rebbe sees him. And as he walks in, these are the words the Rebbe says. Was is Zaid, literally the same words the Rebbe said to him at Erev Yom Kippur. And what is a Jew? And the Rebbe says, the Gemara Chagiga says, that a Jew, even if he's Peshi Yisrael, even if he's a sinner, even if he's from the sinners of Israel, he's filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So the Rebbe said, why like a pomegranate? Why not seeds of some other fruit? So he said, because in a pomegranate, the seeds are separated by membranes, by this thin flesh. And that's the point. The Gemara is saying, so how could he be a sinner if he's filled with mitzvahs? Because the mitzvahs are not internalized. They're separated. There's a membrane that separates them from the fruit is separated. Whereas a person who's not a Paisha Yisrael integrates it. So his work is to internalize. Maybe that the Rebbe elaborated, but that was the point. I'm saying it only in context. We spoke before about looking at this whole picture. You have to remember the lens of Torah, especially when you learn Chassidus, the Rebbe's lens. The goodness is everywhere. Evil is an anomaly, the aberration. Unfortunately, evil can become so powerful that it seems like it's the given. I mean, look what happened now in Texas or other things. And when you look around the world, you see Rishayim Gavrim Bey. The Alter Rebbe says that the matters, the affairs of this world are mole, are koshim, v'roim, this physical world. It's a harsh world. There's no doubt about it. You don't even need the Holocaust to see it. The Holocaust is just a demonstration. And even with all that, the famous Sikh of the Rebbe, Basel Legani, Yud Shvat Tov Shem Lamed Beis, 1972, that Basel Legani, the world is still a garden. Even after all the concealments, fundamentally a garden has been concealed. And it's a fundamental different way of looking at existence, at looking at people. And also it's the only way that, you really always have hope. Because if you go the other direction, that the world is really evil, and we have to battle and find some little good in there, it can become very depressing. How do you know that good will prevail? This is the whole basis why we firmly believe that if you keep working at it, it will ultimately emerge. So when I look at the Machzira Lemutim, that's essentially what it's saying. Torah will ultimately prevail. Even though there are delays and things have happened and we've seen concealments. I mean, what do you need more? 1.5 million innocent children gassed, murdered by the Nazis. 6 million, many will learn Torah, a lot of Torah. I mean, it's heartbreaking is not even the right word. It's earth-shattering, and the heavens themselves. How do you explain such a thing? Especially when you hear all this, where these expressions in the Torah and all the blessings and the promises. But we have to believe this is the way we see things. So, little Farbrengen here. I'm not sure where the inspiration is coming from, but maybe it's the right time. Pasha b'chukaisai, maybe.
Sure. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, so we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph on page